Well, after nearly a year, I finally finished one of the first games I started playing on this channel, Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16 is my first Final Fantasy game to play in full. I played a little bit of 7 in the past, both the original and the remake, but I never got too far into either of them, more just scratching the surface. The reason I chose to play Final Fantasy 16 was because it was a new game and this was a new channel, and I thought that would work well together. Now, that's probably not the best choice to pick a game, but I'm still really glad I played this game because Final Fantasy 16 is one of my favorite games of 2023. The purpose of this video is just for me to talk about how great this game is and why it is one of my favorite games over the past couple of years. And obviously, this video will contain spoilers for Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16 is a tale of love and loss, the importance of family, regardless of whether it's the one you're born into or the one you find along the way, and above all of that, standing up for your beliefs, fighting for a better world, and choosing your own fate.
You could have just said I.
For me, when I'm looking at what makes a game great, it's always the story, the world, and the characters that matter the most to me. Gameplay and interesting concepts are all well and good, but they'll always come second place to the writing of the game. As long as the game has good writing, I'll always find something to enjoy about it, something to cling on to. I think this is something that Final Fantasy 16 does in spades. The story is engaging and interesting, the world is vast and well written, and the characters are just a joy to learn about while experiencing the story through them. Final Fantasy 16's story is basically a classic fantasy story. It's Clive's story of his fall from nobility to his rise into leading the outlaw group to eventually saving the world. It's all very normal for any fantasy setting, especially a fantasy game. You can look at 1,000 different stories like Dragon Age, Skyrim, or Game of Thrones and find similar stories. But again, I think Final Fantasy 16 just does this classic fantasy story really well. Like a lot of fantasy games as well, it divides its plot into a real world plot of saving the bearers and destroying the mother crystals, and its fantasy plot of stopping Ultima. Now, what I really love about these endgame goals is while they're not entirely groundbreaking for a fantasy game, stopping the big bad from his evil, dastardly plan, or saving a downtrodden community who've suffered for generations at the hands of others for no reason at all. These are classic fantasy tropes. You get them in a lot of games. What I love about it in Final Fantasy 16 is how combined with each other they are. Neither of them loses their importance. The goal of destroying the Mother Crystals is pretty much there from the very beginning, from the end of Act 1, all the way up until the end of the game. The second last mission of the game is still destroying the last Mother Crystal. It's not something that gets dealt with early on and then gets pushed into the background while Clive and the gang deal with Ultima. It's always still there, and both storylines are always interconnected with each other. It's as equally important to destroy the Mother Crystals as it is to defeat Ultima. And that's even before we fully realize how much they are actually really connected to each other. I can't help thinking of something like Dragon Age Origins or Skyrim. Both these games have real world political plots and fancy plots. In Dragon Age, it's defeat the Blight, and in Skyrim, it's defeat Alduin. But their real world plots are in Dragon Age, it's defeat Loghain, and in Skyrim, it's the Civil War. In those games, it kind of feels like there's two main plots that are going parallel to each other that kind of cross over every once in a while. And then at one point, you may or may not have to deal with the real world plot so you can deal with the fantasy plot. But in Final Fantasy 16, that doesn't happen. Clive's goal of saving the bearers and taking out the mother crystals is equally important as it is at taking out Ultima. And I really like that. I really like that this plot point is so important to Clive and Sid at the start of the game, and it never loses its importance. It's always why Clive is fighting. Even when he has to take out Ultima, it's to make a better world, not save this world. Well, I think the story is really good, and I'm not going to talk about the nitty gritty of the story too much, but why I think the story works best is the world and characters. The lore of Final Fantasy 16 is really interesting. One of the reasons I love fantasy and sci fi is because I love learning about new lore. The lore of a world, of a setting, of how different factions interact with each other. How does the magic work? Are the gods real? These are questions I love to try and answer. And I think Final Fantasy 16 really delivers on this. The entire world, from the icons and dominants to the political factions and Sid's outlaws, how all these things and more create this world of Final Fantasy 16 is really, really interesting to me. And you can see there's a lot of attention to detail in this game. While I looked into a lot of it by talking to Vivienne or using the active time lore feature, which every game should have, I feel like I've only scratched the surface of the world of Valisthea. We get hints that there's something across the ocean, but we barely get to see that. And we don't get to see a lot of the Ironborn or see Willow before it falls to Ultima. We know there was something there, but we only really get hints of what it was. And I would love to see more of that, but at the same time, I'm glad we don't because it makes the world feel bigger and more alive. What lies across the sea, what are the nations and their people like, is completely irrelevant to Clive and Jill and Joshua. It doesn't matter to them because it doesn't affect their journey, so they don't really look into it. They don't care what Willow used to be like before it fell, because in the end, it doesn't affect their end goal. And I love when a game does this because it makes me just want to learn more. The game and its world have hooked me in very easily, and that can be a very hard thing for any game to do. There's only a handful of games like Elder Scrolls or Dragon Age or Mass Effect where the world has fully hooked me in as much as the story and gameplay has. And as great as the world of Final Fantasy 16 is, it's the characters that I love the most. Each character that you meet really, for the most part, stands out. Whether that's the main characters you spend the vast majority of your time with, or side characters who only appear in the side quests. There's a lot of good standout characters in Final Fantasy 16, and Clive is obviously at the top. Clive is a brilliant protagonist and a brilliant hero. There's a lot to like about him. He's strong, he's charismatic, he's reliable. You understand what he's trying to do and why people follow him. It's his natural likability and his believability. You believe that Clive will save the world. When we get that time jump after destroying the first Mother Crystal and Sid dies, Clive is the new Sid and he leads the Outlaws, and you don't need that explained of why he is now leading the Outlaws because it just makes sense. Even though there are characters like Gav and Otto who have been there longer, it just makes sense for Clive to be the one everyone would look to, that he would be the one to become the new Sid. And you get that's what Sid, the old Sid, actually wants. Now there are some things not to like about Clive, and that's really, really good. Clive is really headstrong. He puts his friends' needs before his own, and he's willing to push the people closest to him away so he can protect them. And while these are probably not good traits or characteristics for a person to have, they are great traits and characteristics for a character to have because it makes Clive relatable and believable. If Clive was perfect and could do no wrong, we'd run the risk of him becoming stale and boring. And obviously, that's not great for any protagonist. But the fact that you can look at Clive and be like, don't say that or don't make that choice, it makes him a much more interesting character. If you watch my Let's Play, you would see anytime Clive and Jill had like a near romantic moment and Clive kind of backed away from it, I was like, oh my god, what are you doing, you idiot? Which, yes, like for a character that can be a bit frustrating, but for a real person, it's so relatable. It made me kind of see Clive as a real person and it made me relate to Clive more so than a lot of other characters I played. But the one thing I love about Clive the most is that he changes throughout the game. Any work of fiction that has a character change, whether for good or bad, to me is making a great choice in making that character just much more real and enjoyable. When we see him at the start of the game, when he's one of the Empire's assassins, we see that he doesn't care. But when we see him in the flashback as a teenager, it's the opposite. Clive in his youth is very optimistic about life. He enjoys his life. He is happy to be a shield to Joshua and he is happy to do his part for Rosaria. Even though we don't get to see that time jump from his teenage years to when he's a slave of the Empire, we can see from that little interaction we do have with him that he's incredibly broken. But as he reunites with Jill and meets Sid and the other outlaws, we see Clive's personalities and goals change. Clive goes from being this very selfish person who doesn't care about much. He's only out to avenge his brother, regardless of the effect that has on him. He's willing to die to get this last little bit of revenge on the man he believes killed Joshua. And he's very distrustful of others, especially Sid and the Outlaws. The only one he really trusts is Jill, and that's because of their shared past. You can see that Clive is searching for death right up until the end of Act 1. You get the impression that Clive has one last thing to do, and that if it doesn't kill him, he may just end it all because he's so broken and just done. All this changes when he discovers that he is the one who killed Joshua, as far as he believes. He ends up becoming a different person. He decides that it's better off living and changing the world so this doesn't happen again. He realizes that death is not his atonement. Clive goes from being selfish and jaded to selfless and optimistic. But not all aspects of Clive change. One thing I like about Clive's story is that he never really forgives his mother for betraying Rosaria and their family. From the start to the end, he just sees her as another villain. When he finds her when Twinside is falling, he doesn't feel any connection to her. He doesn't feel any connection to his half brother. He just wants to know why she betrayed him, why she betrayed Rosaria. And in the end, when she's about to take her own life and Joshua is trying to save her, to extend an olive branch and be like, no, come with us, you'll be safe. Clive doesn't care. He just watches it all happen. And you get the impression that he can kind of go either way with it. He might let her live, but that's only because what Joshua wants. He's more than willing to let her die and be happy with it. And for the rest of the game, her death never weighs on him. He never brings it up. It's just this thing that happens, and he's probably okay with it. In the end, Clive shows a strong sense of nobility and a desire to help others, regardless of the effect it has on himself. But at the same time, he doesn't hide from his emotions. He shows a vulnerable emotional side as well as his strong side. Some of the best parts in the game is when Clive just breaks down emotionally and lets it all out, especially when he believes Joshua's died at the start of the game. And when Joshua actually dies at the end of the game, the acting in this scene and the emotion that we get from Clive is just fantastic. He fully lets out and doesn't bottle up his feelings. He lets it all out. And while Clive is an incredible character, he's not the only one. And as I said, I feel like all of the characters offer something important to Final Fantasy XVI. I love the comparability of Jill and Dion's stories. Nobles who have fallen from grace, but during their time as dominants of Shiva and Bahamut, caused pain and suffering, and now, like Clive, they search for atonement. Jill seeks her atonement through vengeance, like Clive, while hunting down her former masters, ensuring that they never hurt anyone. And for Dion, his atonement, he believes, will come from his death, also like Clive. And it's great to see two characters that have a lot in common. They take different paths in their stories despite being very similar at significant parts of their journeys. Joshua is a strong parallel to Clive. He wants the same as Clive and acts quite a lot like Clive at certain times. He can be outspoken and brash at times, and he's constantly putting others ahead of himself, which eventually leads to his own death. I like that Joshua and Clive are both like this. I like that they are two sides of the same coin. And to round it all off, my last two favorite characters are Sid and Mid, who complement each other really well, even though they don't have any scenes together. Like Jill and Dion, Sid and Mid are two sides of the same coin. They both want to help the world and make it a better place, but like the others, their stories go in different directions. Sid is more confrontational character who ends up sacrificing himself so Clive can be the one to save the world, while Mid will sacrifice her legacy and the importance she can have in the world when she realizes the harm it could cause. She can give the world flight, but she knows at this moment the world is not ready for it. So she'd rather wait for future generations to find her work when they are ready. Which, given everything we've seen about her character up until this moment, is a massive sacrifice for her. Mid is a great example of advancement of technology without the advancements of social responsibility. Only in Final Fantasy XVI, she stops before it becomes a problem. And then we have all the brilliant side characters. Characters like Martha and the Dame and Lubor and Wade and Byron. Characters who are not in the game that long, but they leave a significant impact on the game and the player because they stand out so well. It would be easy to make characters like Martha and the Dame very similar to each other or even the same character, but they don't. They feel real and unique. And this is done through the side quests that the game offers up. Now, I know a lot of people don't like Final Fantasy 16 side quests, but I do. Now, I do agree that the structure of the side quest is pretty basic. It usually revolves around to talk to someone, kill something, and then return to the first person. Yes, they are very simple side quests, but I cannot think of any open world game that doesn't have side quests like this. And I think this is just a fact of gaming that a lot of side quests in games are like this. However, what Final Fantasy 16 does really well in its side quest is the world building and character development. I'm reminded of the first time you go to Martha's Rest early on in the game, and you get a side quest from a merchant who looks down on Clive because he has a brand. And through this, you get a simple, quick view of how people treat Brandon in the world. But then later in the game, after a quick time jump, Clive no longer has the brand. You meet the merchant again, and he doesn't recognize Clive because he doesn't see the brand. The brand is the only thing people see when they look at the bearers. This shows they care so much about the brand that it's all they see. This is seen later on and in more detail in Lubor's personal quest line, where the residents of the Dalmill Inn turn on him when they learn he is a bearer. They go from respecting him and wanting him to be their mayor to vilifying him despite all the good he's done. Those side quests with Lubor are very simple, but through those quests, it helps to build out Lubor's character and show what our heroes are fighting against and fighting to change. Through the side quests, we learn what drives these characters and why they find themselves willing to work with Sid the Outlaw. Like Sid, they've suffered because of the world and they seek to change it. Quentin was betrayed by a system he believed in and now he seeks to bring it down with others who have been betrayed by that system. Eloise gave up her life because she saw the suffering of bearers through her brother, and she will sacrifice a lot to ensure it doesn't happen to others. I do understand the criticism that people put on the side quests for being the weakest part of the game, but for me, you just need to look past the surface level and see the brilliant and important parts that they play in the game. Quickly, I want to talk about how brilliant the music for Final Fantasy 16 is. I think it's just outstanding. I think Final Fantasy 16 has some of the best music in any game, especially the battle music. I love that it's not over the top and heavy. I love that it's calm and orchestral, and that all of it just adds to the weight of these really big fights. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Final Fantasy 16 is perfect. It's not. But for me, the drawbacks that people bring up are just not that important for me. As I mentioned, the side quests don't really dampen my experience of the game. I've seen a lot of people also say that the lack of RPG elements was a negative for them. I would have liked this. I would have liked the ability to customize Clive and Jill, Joshua and Torgal more. The ability to improve their stats or skills, or just have more clothing options for them would have been great. But like the side quests, the lack of these options doesn't really impact me all that much. Maybe it's because I don't have much connection to the Final Fantasy series, so maybe that's it. It is a negative for me, but it's such a minute detail that I don't really mind that they're missing. Now, I said I really love Final Fantasy 16, but the story is as only as good as its ending, and I think Final Fantasy 16 really sticks its ending. I love the ending. It is sad and hopeful and satisfying. It provides good, satisfying answers, but leaves plenty up in the air. I'm not one of these people who needs every question answered. I'm very happy to leave a handful of questions open with the possibility of never even getting the answer. I really love a good tragic ending in a story. As you're approaching the ending, the game kind of sets up the idea of a happy ending. When everything is over and the credits roll, everyone will walk away into a better world. Clive and Joshua hear about their father's will and all the plans he had to make Rosaria a better place for everyone, bearers and non bearers. And you get the impression that this will be Clive and Joshua's goal after they defeat Ultima. They will build the better world their father wanted. You talk to Jill and she wants to travel. She wants to take a ship and see these other lands that we know next to nothing about, and Clive wants to go with her. We see when Byron is seeking help from Havel, we learn that bearers and non-bearers are working together to hold back the Akashic. That history of hate and prejudice is cast aside for survival, and you hope that this will continue after the game ends. You hope that people will realize they can have a better world by working together. As gamers and people who enjoy fiction, we take these hints and assume that this is how Valisthea will continue to go after the game ends. So going into the ending, and I imagine a lot of people, assumed that this would be the future of Valisthea, that Clive and Joshua would rebuild Rosaria as a place for everyone. People would start working together to create a better world. And once all that happens, Clive and Jill would go off to explore the world together. But that's not what we get. That's not the story of Final Fantasy 16. In a lot of ways, Final Fantasy 16 is a story of sacrifice, and that is the ending we get, and I think that's rather good. It's sad to be wrong about our predictions for the ending of the game, and it's sad that we don't get the happy ending, but I think that it is a good ending because of that, because sometimes the hero doesn't get to walk away. From a gameplay perspective, I really like the final boss fight with Ultima, and I really love the emotion we see from Clive leading up to and during the boss fight. I like that we see also the powers of each icon being used. I tried to use each icon during the game, but I always fell back to my three favorites, the Phoenix slash Ifrit, Shiva, and Ramu. So I'm really happy that they all got a moment to shine in the final fight. It makes gathering these abilities throughout the game actually feel worth it. Clive growing in strength and ability as the game progresses, and then using these abilities at the game's climax. It makes it feel as each of these steps we took with Clive was worth it. And then the game ends and Joshua is dead, and Clive tries to use his new abilities from Ultima to bring Joshua back, and it doesn't work. And watching that scene, I was trying to will Joshua to open his eyes, but that doesn't happen. And as the credits roll, we get to see the final shots of Clive and Jill and Gav. And it is heartbreaking, but at the same time, it does leave some ambiguity. I've seen a lot of people bring it up online, and I've had the same thoughts of what happened, what is the answer? And I know I said we don't need every answer, but there are some I desperately want, but I will be satisfied if we never get them. Is Clive dead, and what happens to the world? We get some hints, and some stuff is inferred, but no definite answers. The last we see of Clive is him lying on the beach looking up at the moon and Metia, that little red star. He's unable to cast magic as it is now gone from the world, and the bearer's curse is beginning to spread. And that's it, we don't see any more Clive. And I thought maybe he's okay, maybe the curse won't spread without magic, but we just don't know. And when we cut back to the hideaway with the birth of Edda's son, and this ending is full of metaphor, and Edda's son is one. His birth represents a new world, and as Gav says, this new world is for him. It's the world Clive and Sid wanted. This new child and generations after him get this new world. And it makes sense that the old world dies with Clive, so this new world can be born with this child. I've seen a lot of people bring up theories online that maybe Clive is alive. Jill realizes Clive may be dead when Metia, the Red Star, begins to dim, but it doesn't go out. So maybe Clive is still holding on. Some people brought up Torgal's howl because wolves don't howl to mourn the dead, they howl to signal lost members of the pack, which makes sense since during the years Clive and Torgal were apart, Torgal never gave up searching for Clive. To me, I think that's a bit wishful thinking. I don't know how much research the developers put into wolf howls, so I don't think that's what we are meant to read on this. The last thing then is the rising sun. As Jill lies there mourning Clive, she sees the sun rising. Due to Ultima's actions in creating Origin, this is probably the first rising sun she's seen in a while. This is obviously signaling for a better world. Maybe it's meant to signal out hope for Clive, but I don't see that. My gut says Clive dies alone on that beach, and that's really sad. And I think by everything we see in the ending, that's what we're meant to infer. All these metaphors, the birth of Edda's son, Metis still being there, and the rising sun is meant to imply that yes, they and the world have suffered, however, the world will heal. And that's what we see post credits. We now see that the world has moved forward and healed, but it is moved so far forward that the story of Clive and a gang has faded into fantasy. We see that this happy dream that Sid wanted is now reality. And while we don't see much, we can infer a lot from what we see. We see that the world is vibrant and healthy, the plants are alive and green, the children are able to go off by themselves to collect wood for the fire, implying that the world is safe. And that magic is gone. We see that throughout Final Fantasy 16, that the biggest problem in the world is magic. That without magic there is no blight. That without the bearers and their ability to cast magic without the crystals, this form of slavery wouldn't exist. And now that there's no magic, we can assume that the world has improved, even if it's not perfect. And that's what Clive says to Ultima as Ultima dies, that yes, humanity is not perfect, but we'll try for a better world, and we are meant to believe that in the end of the game, that the world is better. Yes, it's sad that we don't get to see it, and that Clive, Sid, and Joshua and Dion don't get to see this better world, but it's a good ending because the world gets to go on to be the world they wanted. It's a good kind of sad because Clive's story gets to live on. I love when the camera pans across the home and we see the book Final Fantasy by Joshua Rosfield. And we get to see the kids playing the War of the Icons and arguing who gets to be a free, and the dog's name is Bahamut. I love that trope that the story gets to live on in another way now that Clive's adventure is a story, it's a fantasy. It is Final Fantasy. But the book is the one gripe I have with the ending, and that's it's Final Fantasy by Joshua Rosfield. Personally, I don't like that it's by Joshua because it can imply that Joshua survived, or did he write the book before his death and we just didn't see it? I can't remember seeing the book at any point in game. Maybe I missed it, but I think having it be by Joshua wasn't the best choice. I think having it by Jill would have been a better choice. It should have said Final Fantasy by Jill Warwick. Jill is the one left behind. She's the last dominant, not counting Walgis, who is a baby and only appears in the DLC. So I think having Jill be the sole survivor, the one who did not go off to fight and save the world with the love of her life and her adopted brother, but instead be the one who tells their story, would have been better. But like the side quests and the lack of RPG elements, it's such a small issue that it doesn't affect my enjoyment all that much. What is sad about this most for me is we're probably not going to see this world and these characters again. For the most part, Final Fantasy games are standalone games. When the game ends, that is it. And when Final Fantasy 17 comes out, I will play it because of my experience with Final Fantasy 16, but it won't be a sequel. It won't be set in Valistia 100 years later. It won't start with Clive waking up the beach and having that adventure with Jill. Maybe we might see Clive and Jill and Joshua appear in other games like Smash Brothers or the next Kingdom Hearts game, but it won't be the same. We won't see this Valistia again. We won't see Rosaria or Sam Breck again. That ending feels very definite, and while it is nice to close the book on Final Fantasy 16, it is still very, very sad at the end. But at the same time, because we won't see any more of this world, it allows us to hope that this world will survive and that everything will work out in the end. For me, the desire to have everything work out is why I love this game. Final Fantasy 16 feels real to me. Games that fully envelop me and make the world feel alive are my favorites, and I think Final Fantasy 16 does this brilliantly, and it's all in the little details. It's the ambient dialogue we hear in the world, where we hear people of Martha's Rest or Northreach or the Hideaway talking about what's going on in the world and how it affects them. Seeing the background characters change as the world does is brilliant. When we go to the Hideaway and talk with our allies like Sharon or Blackthorn and are getting different opinions on what's going on, whether they are similar or different, makes it all feel alive and real. When you talk to Vivian about updates and she tells us about what's going on in the world and how our actions are affecting them, I love that because it makes the world feel like a real reactive place to what we are doing. To me, in the end, the world of Final Fantasy 16 feels alive, it feels real, and that's why I love it because I care about it. I want Clive and Joshua and everyone to succeed in defeating Ultima and destroying the Mother Crystals and saving the world, not because I put so much time and effort into the game, not because I'm a completionist who wants to just finish it or because I'm hooked on the story, which I am. I'm hooked on the world. And I want Valistia to survive and be better, and I think that's what makes the game great. The last few videos of Let's Play, I kept saying that I'm ready for Final Fantasy 16 to end, that I've enjoyed it, but I'm ready to move on to something else. But now that I'm no longer playing it, it feels like there's something missing, and I just want to sit down and start the adventure all over again.